nature.
In your speech, you spoke about illicit drug production. You also talked about transnational organized crime. You called for efforts individually and collectively. So I suppose my first question is, what are illicit drugs? Are you talking about orthodox drugs produced illegally, or you're talking about street drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine and stuff? What do you mean by illicit drugs?
First of all, the scheduling system of the United Nations, that determines what is considered to be illicit drugs. And those ones that you mentioned, like cocaine, cannabis, heroin, morphine, all of those fall in it. Then you have also a wide range of pharmaceutical opioids that are also scheduled. That means they're controlled medicines. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily illegal, but they're basically only supposed to be available on prescription by a medical doctor. And then you have an increasing number of pharmaceuticals, I wouldn't call them pharmaceuticals, basically substances that are being produced not for the legal market, even though they are at the basis pharmaceutical products. So for example, you have tramadol, which normally is prescribed at a concentration of either 50 or 100 milligrams. But when you look in the market, there's a lot of tramadol pills with a far higher concentration available. And those have not been produced from the very beginning as medical pharmaceuticals, but have been produced exclusively for the non-medical use, so to get high. So that is basically the differentiation that you have to keep in mind.
The other question is about legalization of marijuana. I was researching and I found that some countries are legalizing the use and commercial use also of marijuana. What is the UN's policy regarding this? Does the United Nations support legalizing marijuana in any form, either by for commercial export or the use, even though in minute quantities?
Well, first of all, it is not the United Nations as an organization establishing rules, but member states that establish the rules collectively. And as such, marijuana continues to be a scheduled drug, which means that its production is to be controlled. There is the possibility for commercial production, quite legally speaking, but under strict control so that the substance doesn't become available essentially for general use. There is, of course, some countries that have experimented with some form of decriminalization, because I think that's very important to make that small distinction.
Yes.
It's not about legalizing drugs or in particular cannabis, but it is about decriminalizing the use. We are looking very carefully at these experiences. We're trying to learn from them. We try to understand to what extent does that actually, for example, fulfill the hypothesis that the illegal market gets dried up, and therefore there's some benefits in that because you no longer have that illegal economy. We try to understand, of course, what effects it has on drug use prevalence in general, in the general population, and other health, of course, effects, which over long term we need to determine to what extent these experiments, I would call them, nothing else so far, are proving actually to have overall a beneficial effect or not, and I think it's too early to actually say.
Okay. Finally, I know you want to go. HONLAP will provide recommendations to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Will these recommendations form parts of policy for the UNODC going forward?
Well, I would certainly think so, and I would certainly hope so. It is a unique opportunity to have the actual practitioners come in. These are not diplomats that we, of course, also very much appreciate in terms of the policy making, but we need to make sure that the practitioners that are really working on the front line of the fight against drug trafficking continue to feed into the process. And that is exactly the purpose of these specific meetings of heads of drug law enforcement agencies, to make sure that they are constantly feeding their operational experiences into the policy dialogue so that our policies are as evidence-based as possible and hopefully as effective as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oliver StoLPE, for speaking with me today.